Hello and welcome back to The Hatch. I'm Rosie Murphy.
And I'm Sammy Roth, and this is the podcast where we talk about Lost.
We're in Season 5, so much is happening, but we've reached Episode 9, Namaste.
We will be talking about this episode, of course, but we're going to go back and revisit LaFleur a bit at the end. We've got more from our conversation with Mark Goldman, who directed that episode.
Let's get started.
Let's start with our hot takes about Namaste. Rosie, what were you feeling flaming hot about while watching this one?
So it's been a while since I had one of these, but this is something that actually made me sit up while I was watching this episode and exclaim a little bit. Apparently the Dharma Initiative has no form of maternal or parental leave. Amy had a baby literally yesterday. And she's expected to work. Juliet goes up to her and is like,
oh my God.
Oh, let me take the sub-manifest. And of course, Juliet's got something else cooking, but, you shouldn't be expected to work today. And then later in the episode, I think it's Pierre Chang who mentions kind of off the cuff, but in a way that's really rude. Oh yeah, and Amy just had this baby, so of course she didn't show up today. And it's what the heck, people?
Wow.
Let Amy live. So
that's a great take.
That's what and I understand it, it was the 70s. Lots of people even today do not have maternity leave, but literally yesterday she gave birth. Oh, I'm mad
just
about
goes
that.
to show even the hippies were not so woke.
No.
Yeah, good take. It didn't occur to me at all. My hot take is about how Jack just gets absolutely savaged 3 different times in this episode, by my count.
Oh no.
Yeah, so I counted 3 of them. One is when Kate and Jack and Hurley are just hanging out on that bluff kind of area waiting for Sawyer to come and tell them what to do. And Kate says to Jack, "So the woman who told you how to come back, did she mention it would be 30 years ago?" Which is just real good.
Great question.
Real good. And Jack has nothing to say because nope, I didn't know. Nope, he did not. Then later, we know that Jack gets the assignment to be a workman, aka a janitor, like Roger Linus before him, which is pretty great. But one thing that I had never noticed is that Sawyer actually is asked, says something about their work assignments, and someone's like, Jack's like, "What are you talking about?" And he says, "Don't worry, I got it covered." It was Sawyer who gave them their work assignment. So it was Sawyer who assigned Jack to be a janitor.
That's funny. And
additionally,
I believe, again, it's Pierre Chang who says, these were the results as determined by your aptitude test.
Yes.
Which would seem to suggest that Sawyer's having a little joke here about... Yeah.
Agreed. And I had never caught that was Sawyer who did that. So that's Jack being savaged for the second time. The third one is once again Sawyer, and I'll save, we should save most of this for talking about that amazing Jack Sawyer scene at the end of the episode. But I just got to say, when Jack defends himself by saying,
"I got us off the island. But here you are, right back where you started."
Yeah, that is a burn. That is a true burn by Sawyer right there. So Jack gets savaged 3 times, and that is my hot take.
Yeah. I mean, for what it's worth, I think that's as good a place to start as any. That Sawyer-Jack scene is kind of the climax of the episode, and it's... Well, actually, I don't quite stand by that. We'll get to that later, but it's really fun to see this bit of role reversal, and Sawyer, says out loud what I think has been on your mind and mine for a lot of this series, which is that Jack, as a leader, was often impulsive, sometimes to the benefit of the group and sometimes not so much. And, Sawyer claiming to be similar to Winston Churchill is kind of funny, but he is right. He did come up with a plan that he was able to execute in terms of getting them into the Dharma Initiative, and so far it seems to be working, and he is able to sort of buy Sayid some time. We'll see that play out over the next couple of episodes, but in that great sort of faux interrogation between Sawyer and Sayid, when he's, insisting that he admit that he's a hostile so that the truce can apply. And it's very wink, wink, nudge, nudge, but it's so subtle.
Yeah.
Josh Holloway's face, the skin around his eyes like barely moves as he's sending this message to Saeed, and Saeed gets it. And
right, it's like his face is begging Saeed, like, please go along with this, trust me, just listen very carefully to what I'm saying. And he communicates it with his eyes and with his expression in a very, very subtle way. I agree with that.
Yeah. So I think this just builds on our conclusion from LaFleur, which is Sawyer really can do this, and he's good at it. And even when all of these other people come back and introduce all these additional complications, he's able to combine these con man skills with these like leader of men skills to great effect.
Yeah, no, that's like half the notes I have on this episode is just what a smart and thoughtful and effective leader Sawyer is, and compassionate too. I mean, he's doing all this, for the benefit of somewhat for the benefit of himself, because if they start talking, he could be, screwed up. But mostly, I think he wants to make sure they're all safe.
Yeah.
And I mean, that scene with Saeed is such a good example. It's just he has so few options there for how to handle this. And he really just, it's so clever how he comes up with this scenario where he's going to be able to sort of tell Saeed without telling him, here's what I need you to do to get through this. He explains the truce. He explains that you need to identify yourself. He tells Saeed his title and his name to give Saeed, some semblance so that he can't just start calling him Sawyer. It's really, really smart. And so is the plan with, saying that they came in on the sub.
Yeah. Which, to be fair, is Juliet's idea.
Yes, it is. This is true. Actually, one thing I thought was interesting about that scene, and tell me if you agree or disagree with this, but I kind of interpreted that scene that Juliet had that idea on her mind and wasn't sure if she was going to share it or not, or at least was hesitant to share it. Because at the beginning of the scene, you get Sawyer finally telling her what's going on, which is a relief because I didn't like that he was hiding it from her. And then her immediate reaction is concern. She looks verklempt about this, like she doesn't like hearing this news. And I think that Sawyer sort of notices that. And then he goes and he sits down next to her on the bed. And he says,
I don't understand it any more than you do. But they're here. And I gotta find a way to bring them in before somebody else finds them. They screw up everything we got here.
And I interpreted this as, he sees her distress and wants to communicate to her that is his priority, to not screw up what they've got. And whether he thinks he needs to communicate that to her because of the Kate thing or because of, broader reasons, whatever it is. So my interpretation is that he sees her distress, he wants to communicate that to her, and at that point, that's when she says, there's a sub coming in today. I don't know, I was kind of reading it as maybe that was on her mind, and she, finally, after she, sees that Sawyer is, in the same place as she is here, that she's, she wants to help and share this with him. I don't know, yes, no, maybe reading too much into it.
I mean, I think there's a lot going on in that scene. I did watch that back a couple times, just trying to parse the sort of series of expressions that pass over Elizabeth Mitchell's face as Juliet is coming to terms with this news. And I think she's shocked. She's totally stunned. She's kind of disturbed for a minute. I mean, a sense of like, what in the absolute hell? Like, of all the things she expected to hear, that was way, 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 way far down the list. And to Juliet's credit, just like Sawyer, she takes a beat and kind of says like, okay, yes, this could, if they come barging in here and say, we know you guys, that could really endanger us. It's time to put a plan in place. And I think to her great credit, she does. This is a really smart idea. Let's pretend they were on the sub. People are drugged. They won't remember each other. I'm going to go procure the manifest and make sure that they get added. I mean, it's a lot goes into this. And credit to her, just like credit to Sawyer for thinking on her feet.
Yeah, I think your Occam's razor interpretation is probably a little bit stronger than my more convoluted one. But I think there's definitely, at least at some point in both of their minds here, this question starting to form of what is this going to mean for us, and how do these people being back from the before times affect what we've got between us, more so than just how are the events going to play out. Yeah,
and I think certainly Kate's part of that in the show is really trying to take us there, but I think...
it's trying too hard. I didn't like the scene at the end, the waving from the porch. That was so annoying.
I agree.
It's like, really, she happens to be in the house right next door, and you're like school kids out there, like kind of side-eyeing each other. Yeah.
Yeah, like...
Didn't like it.
Yeah, I don't know. I think the love triangle is kind of the least of our problems here. These people, A, they came back to the island. Why the heck did they do that? B, apparently they too are traveling through time and somehow have ended up in 19... Like, we have so many bigger questions here to deal with than this love triangle. But, so yeah, and I think, we talked about this obviously to great extent when we watched LaFleur, but my preferred interpretation is that Juliet is secure enough in her relationship with Sawyer, and Sawyer too is, despite being a little shaken and surprised when he sees Kate, also quite secure in their relationship, and they're able to sort of put all the drama aside, such as it is, except for needling Jack a little bit.
Yeah. One thing that I want to bring up, we got an interesting comment from some interesting comments from two of our listeners on Twitter on this Sawyer and Kate question that we were discussing last week that I think is relevant here. In last week's episode, we were talking about if Sawyer is truly over Kate and he's not thinking about her anymore, what's going on with the continued searching of, for people on the island, the continued searching for, are Jack and Kate and Hurley, et cetera, going to come back and Locke and, not just is Sawyer over Kate, but also, is he really happy with what they've got there if he's still out searching for these people? And one of our listeners on Twitter wrote back, Sawyer sent Jin to look for the people they lost during the Flaming Arrow night. He is not looking for John Locke and neither Kate, but he is talking about Rose and Bernard and others. And then another listener replies to this, yes, as far as James is concerned, his, quote, meet at the creek, quote, was responsible for everyone else's death, and he hasn't stopped looking for any survivors. And that's actually, I think, something that didn't occur to us last week, and a very strong interpretation, especially because when they do find Rose and Bernard in the finale, Sawyer asks him, didn't you hear me shout out, meet at the creek? And he says, well, we spent all sorts of time looking for you. I had Jen out searching the island grid by grid. So that supports that interpretation.
Yeah, I have nothing to add to that. I think that's spot on. I feel like a little foolish for not thinking of it myself, because Sawyer says as much.
And it doesn't mean they weren't also, hoping to find Locke and if he brought people back, but it definitely tells you that there was more than, that couldn't just be the only reason for it. They were definitely out looking for everyone else too.
Yeah.
It's a good call. No, I mean, I don't know, we could probably just spend hours talking about Sawyer in this episode, but there's just so much great Sawyer stuff. I mean, the whole scene with Jack and Sawyer at the end is just such a classic. I know, as you were saying, it's a little much for him to compare himself to Winston Churchill and then...
So I'm going to go back to reading my book, and I'm going to think. Because that's how I saved your ass today. And that's how I'm going to save Saeed's tomorrow. All you got to do is go home, get a good night's rest. Let me do what I do.
It's like, yeah, he's a little bit full of himself, but he's earned
right.
it. Yeah. He actually is a much better leader than Jack ever was, at least from what we see in this episode.
It's a really, really bold choice to just, walk into Sawyer's cabin that first night. That kind of jeopardizes this whole project because it makes Phil suspicious. And Jack sort of storms in there and demands to know what the plan is. And yeah, Sawyer is funny and impressive in that scene, but that also made me a little mad at Jack. You need to calm down, my guy. This is a game of subtlety, and now is not the time to be storming into places. And that's, Sawyer's not wrong when he says you have basically one mode and it's reactive.
Well, that's interesting to me for two reasons. One is that I agree, actually. I was mad at Jack. I was mad at Jack especially when he says to Sawyer, when Sawyer says, I'm working on it, and Jack says, really? Because it looked to me like you were reading a book. Which, it's like, Jack, calm the hell down. He why are you throwing shade? He saved you today.
Right.
I mean, and Sawyer's going to explain that to Jack because he needs it to be explained to him. But yeah, he's definitely, he's doing his reactive thing at the beginning of that scene. But at the end, when Sawyer says, I'm going to solve this for you, and asks Jack, now ain't that a relief? And Jack's response is, yeah. And, you know, Jack really does look relieved in that moment, and Sawyer looks surprised by it. But, I mean, I think this moment is the beginning of this, you know, newish Jack that we're going to see glimpses of over the next few episodes. And then, yeah, then he tries to do the thing with the hydrogen bomb. But then especially in season 6, you know, after the, you know, in leading up to and around the lighthouse episode, like, yeah, we are going to see this, you know, this somewhat newer version of Jack where he's willing to, you know, take some time and, you know, just kind of be and not be running around doing shit and just kind of reflect and see how events play out. And I think that that's sort of beginning here.
That's a really interesting point that he just hadn't really he immediately snapped back into sort of his old mode where, you know, in the years of the beach camp in the caves, Sawyer was sitting around reading a book, and it was sort of, he was a thorn in Jack's side, whereas now Jack doesn't realize how significantly that has changed.
Wait, that's so interesting. I'd forgotten about that. You're totally right. Sawyer used to like to read on the beach, and that's why he had the glasses episode. Wow, it's for a totally different reason now. You're right. Before it represented him, you know, like staying out of events and just trying
or being kind of lazy or, you know, in an uncharitable interpretation.
Whereas now it's totally the opposite. It's something that he's doing to keep his mind sharp because he wants to make good decisions and help everyone.
Yeah.
Ooh, that's so good. I mean, and he has the compassion. I mean, one of my favorite moments is when, you know, he says, you know, about Saeed, bring the man some damn food. We're not savages. I think that would have been his response even if it wasn't Saeed, even if it really was a hostile, because that's who he is now. It's definitely not who he was, you know, 3 years ago, or especially 3 years and 4 months ago, but this is Sawyer now.
Yeah.
Anyway. You know, one Sawyer and Juliet question I have. Amy comments this episode, or Amy asks Juliet in that scene you referenced where Amy should be on maternity leave but is not. You know, she asks, "Are you and, you know, when are you and James, or when are you and Jim going to have a kid?" And it did make me kind of wonder. Gee, you know, I wonder if they had ever discussed that, or if that's something they would have wanted to do had, you know, events not otherwise intervened. It's never really addressed otherwise, I think, but it's an interesting question.
Yeah, and all Juliet says in response is the timing's got to be right, which is, you could interpret that any number of ways. I think the way I interpreted it is, you know, to the question of timing and time in general, do they really know that this is permanent? Like, they have had this experience where they flashed through time, and the flash is stopped, but I don't know how you go through that and ever really feel like you are just going to be in one place and one set of circumstances again forever. And, you know, I understand if that would make you feel like we can control so little about our circumstances that that makes it really, really hard to make a big decision like having a child. But yeah, I don't know.
I like that interpretation, because what it tells you is that, and it makes sense that even after 3 years here, that after everything that they had both been through, that they still might not necessarily feel like this is secure, this is safe.
Yeah, I mean, they're still afraid of being found out.
Yeah, as they should be. The events of this episode prove them right if they don't feel secure there.
Yeah, I mean, even, you know, Radzinsky and Phil get a little suspicious here, right? Like, we see Radzinsky get extremely suspicious of Jin when he's asking around about a plane landing, and then, you know, they have that alarm tripped, and Jin just tears off into the jungle. Unfortunately, finds Saeed like 5 seconds before Radzinsky does. Phil gets mega suspicious when there are these couple of anomalies with the sub-manifest.
And also when he sees Jack going over to LaFleur's house.
Yeah.
That seems to be a red flag for him.
Yeah.
Both of those guys are such ginormous asses, by the way.
Both of whom we're going to have on the show later this season. So.
Yes, exactly. Patrick Fischler, who plays Phil, and Eric Lang, who plays Radzinsky. We got them both coming on in the next few weeks. And they're very, very sweet, kind people in person, and not at all like their characters on the show. By the way, Radzinsky, I know, you know, it just, my God, not only does he want to, you know, just kill Saeed on the spot, but his whole thing about how, like, he might have seen the model of the Swan. He could have seen the survey of where we're building it, and therefore he must be a spy. We have to shoot him. It's like, my dude, he saw that stuff because you brought him into the flame. He was just wandering out in the jungle. You brought him in there, and that he might have seen the stuff. It's like, well, why did you bring him in here if you didn't want him to fucking see the thing? What an idiot.
Yeah.
Just saying.
Not a great look. To your point from last week, not a great look for the folk of the Dharma Initiative.
Oh my God, it's so true. And your thing about maternity leave just adds to that, like, in a really big way.
And one thing that's funny during the scene where Hurley and Kate and Jack are being processed and welcome to the island is clearly some of the paperwork is not quite there, and Juliet shows up late with the additional sub-manifest, and Pierre Chang, who appears to have some kind of authority around here, is just like, oh man, this always happens. This is such bullshit. Like, they can't keep anything together. And doesn't get suspicious at all, which is a little bit revealing, I think, about the inner workings of this organization.
Well, I mean, let's just comment on Pierre Chang, though. Like, as we discussed in the opening scene of this season, and as we'll discuss more later, and as we discussed with Francois back in season 2, Pierre Chang also kind of a jerk.
Yeah.
I mean, his first interaction with this new recruit who's supposed to be learning to love this place and get acclimated, he's just, bitching about how incompetent his coworkers are. I mean, what kind of person does that? Oh man, Dharma. Yeah, and the other thing in that Amy Juliet scene, just the reveal that, I mean, we get several reveals of characters. Like Ethan as the baby is creepy. I mean, also just like low key, they just start mentioning Radzinsky here, and it's like, oh, Radzinsky, the dude who we find out, later, shoots himself in the head in the hatch.
Oh. Good
because
point.
he'll eventually be Kelvin, Kelvin's partner down there. So we get the Radzinsky reveal, we get Ethan, we get
young Ben.
Just Pierre Chang. Young Ben, exactly. Oh, young Ben is maybe the best one.
Is this a good place to talk about young Ben?
I think this is.
Another terrific moment of just like subtle facial expression by Naveen Andrews in that scene where Bennett gives his name and he just goes, oh, his eyebrows sort of go up a tiny bit, and there's this moment of like recognition / holy shit, and then you just got to keep it moving.
No, I mean, the thing that I want to call out here is just not only is Naveen great in that scene, but Sterling Beaumont, the kid who plays Ben, we talked all about him back in, go back and listen to our episode, The Man Behind the Curtain, in season 3, where we had director Bobby Roth on talking about working with Sterling in that episode. And this is the same kid, 2 years later, luckily enough, perfect timing to come play the slightly older version of young Ben. The stuff he does with his creepy big eyes is just like Michael Emerson. Yeah. It's amazing. It's really amazing.
Yeah. Should we talk a little bit about Son and Frank and Ben and company?
I think we should. Should we start before we get into the on-island stuff with just like Frank landing the plane on the island at the beginning of this episode and how impressive that is?
Mm-hmm. Turns out Frank is a really good pilot.
No shit.
Not that I ever doubted him, but like, it's impressive.
No, he proves it out here, and I was reminded of back in Confirmed Dead when someone suggests to him that where's the helicopter, suggesting it in a way that it must be crashed somewhere, and his response is, "Crash? The hell kind of pilot do you think I am? I put her down safe and sound right over there." And it's like, this is that on a mega scale. Like, he manages to land a jetliner in this circumstance after his co-pilot is yelling like, "You're never gonna make it. You're gonna tear us apart." It's like, nope.
Yep.
Nope. And it's a super cool, I mean, everyone knows this already, but the sort of, shout out to the fact that Sawyer and Kate were, building this runway under forced labor for the others in season 3. It's like, did the writers know exactly how that would end up being used? I doubt it, but the fact that they set that up so that they could do something like this later, it's super, super satisfying.
Mm-hmm. I just want to say that Son is a badass.
Oh yeah, hell yeah.
We've always sort of seen glimpses of this, and we've already talked about it in this season with her interactions with Charles Widmore. But she really goes toe to toe with Ben, up to and including when she just takes an oar and knocks him out when he's on something, giving some speech.
Giving some speech.
And as Ben so frequently does, she sort of got what she needed from him, which was an understanding of where they are and where there might be resources and, access to these outriggers. And now it's time to go.
Yeah. So you're right.
Yeah.
Very Ben-like. Very Ben-like.
The final thing that happens to Frank and Son in this episode is that they go to that cabin, and silhouetted, in the front, the front door is Christian Shepherd.
It's a creepy sequence.
Yeah, it always is when Christian shows up.
The other thing about the Son story that I just want to comment on, thus begins a story where Sun and Jin are both on the island and separated by time and space, and you have no idea how. I mean, we both have seen this, but how long this lasts. I look it up. They don't reunite until episode 13 of season 6, The Last Recruit.
When they die, right?
They die the next episode, the very next episode.
Okay.
So it's more than a season where they're both on the island but not together, and frankly, it's just really frustrating to think about that. Like, it sucks.
It's so sad.
They should have reunited them at the end of season 5 and given them season 6 to be together again and to build up to their deaths. I mean, if that's what they were going to do, it's just I don't like it. Frankly, I don't like it.
Yeah. I mean, it's heartbreaking. Whether or not it's to good effect, I'll wait until season 6 to decide. But
I'm ready to pass judgment. You're fairer than me.
Well, we should probably turn it back over to Mark Goldman, don't you think?
Yeah, I think so. Like I said, we talk a bit more about LaFleur, so shift your mentality back one week. But in a time travel season, hopefully that won't be too hard.
Good point.
So to go back then to that first scene, so before you even get to the Sawyer reveal, I mean, you've got the, like the whole, okay, we're in the 1970s now, get up with the security guards and and the dancing and the brownies. And was that all just like straight out of the script, or was there stuff that you were trying to do with that scene to set the mood and the tone right?
It was mostly the script. I mean, that was the idea. Was to just plunge us into a strange, an unexpected time. Certainly I had ideas about starting with the close-ups of the cassette, of the cassette tape, and having them press the buttons.
Kind of similar to the beginning of season 2, frankly.
Bingo! Look at you. And
I'm learning.
Let me tell you, you've watched the show before. That's exactly right. Now, what's interesting, this episode, not all episodes, that's not true. Often episodes get restructured. You have a scene in Act 1 and you go, this actually doesn't belong here. This should be back in Act 2. And you move stuff around, or the story is not. You're having trouble following the story, and so you start moving scenes around. This show went through a lot of it after I was done. When they watched, when they watched it, and they were like, "We're having a little trouble following this," and we wrote the script, so we have to figure out how to do it differently. And it's been so, it would be interesting to go back and read the shooting script for the episode to see just how much it changed. But I do remember originally the show was supposed to open with the scene underground where they're dancing, and Horace is blowing up trees. And so the very first shot was going to be that ECU of the spindle, with it's not a cassette tape. It's a reel-to-reel tape.
Yep. ECU being extreme close-up.
Exactly. The extreme close-up. And it was, and the idea was to start, and you nailed it, with that same sort of, wait, what are we looking at here? How is the show opening? And then kind of pull back and reveal what's going on. And you're thinking, what does this have to do with Lost? Or at least with our heroes. And in that case, the first time we saw Josh in the episode was that reveal of him being the head of it. So, I know they played with a lot of different things, trying to make sure the audience was going to be able to follow it. And that's where they ended up. it's interesting. As the episode ended up, it kind of feeds right out of the previously on Lost that they have. It's
right. Locke turns the wheel, and then things flash, and then boom, you're right there.
Exactly. We really just picked it up right where we left off, and then we go 3 years later. And again, the idea of having those cards, the titles come up, between, 3 years later, 3 years earlier, it was something I had hoped to avoid in concept. Watching it now, I think not only was it needed, because the hope was between the different uniforms, between Sawyer being more well-groomed 3 years later, that it would be obvious where we were in time. And it was a little too subtle in some cases. And so they kind of needed to set it apart a little bit. And so that's when they played with putting in the titles. And I have to say, it added its own sort of ironic power to it. When, Sawyer says in the beginning, they say, "How long are we going to go at this?" And Sawyer says, "For as long as it takes."
Yeah.
And then you cut to black, and you see a very elegantly faded up 3 years later, and it's like, oh my goodness gracious, what is this? How long it took? So you lost the sort of the disorientation of starting an episode with people that you don't know, in a place you don't know, in a time you're not sure of, based on the monitors and the reel-to-reel tape. So you lose that sort of disorientation and then reveal, but you gain you're setting up the story of the characters that you care about, and then it's like, okay, here's a surprise for you. 3 years later, Sawyer's in charge of security. So that was so some of that was in the way, some of what you're talking about, setting up the feel. It was intended as a confusing first scene, and I don't mean confusing, literally confusing, as this feels different. I wanted it to feel different than your typical Lost scene.
Yeah.
And then when they notice Horace blowing up trees, things start shifting, and it kind of, and then they're rushing across, and it feels a little more like a Lost episode. It just so happened, in trying to find the strongest way to tell a story, which takes place in two different places, and in two places, I mean in two times. If you have an episode of television, and one takes place on this island, the other takes place on that island, and they never interact, and you have to decide when you are going to cut from one place to another, and there's a balancing act between staying too long with one group of people and forgetting all about the other group, or constantly cutting back and forth and it becoming confusing because you're trying to follow two stories at the same time. And this is a situation they had, only instead of two different places, it's two different times.
Right. In the scene with the Dharma security guys at the beginning, the woman who they're dancing with is wearing a Geronimo Jackson shirt, the fake band that's referenced in Lost. I was just curious, was that in the script, or did someone tell you to put her in that, or did you decide to do that? Do you have any recollection?
That wasn't. That was not my decision. I don't remember if it was in the script. I think it was probably the costumer's decision, or I'm sure they, if I remember correctly, I'm sure they checked. They probably said to Jack Bender, "Hey, we have this idea. She'd be wearing Toronto," and he probably was like, he would have said, "Great, that's great."
I just love shit like that. They got so many little cool things in there.
There's so many little things, and that I have another story.
Okay.
When I talk about the support that I got from people that I didn't even really get to talk to much, how the whole crew contributes. So we were shooting a scene in one of the houses. I honestly can't remember if it was Juliet and Sawyer's house, if it was Amy's house, Amy and Horace's house. But it was inside one of the houses, and it was shot on a soundstage in Oahu. And so we finish at like midnight, and I go home, and at noon, I take that back. We finish at like 2-3 o'clock in the morning, and at noon I walk back onto the set. I walk into what I think is the same set I had been on 9 hours before, but I walk in and it's a different place, and I have this moment of going, wait, did I walk in the wrong set? This is a completely different house. While the rest of us were sleeping, the brilliant workers of the art department had torn down the inside of the house and rebuilt it to be a different house, repainted it, and had it all finished in time for me to walk on, So in the space of like 9 hours, they changed it to a completely different interior. And in fact, I remember saying something like, because I was like, I'm confused. Is this where we were shooting last night? And they said, yeah, just, the paint's still wet. Be careful.
Incredible.
The fact that they would, that happened all the time, that is truly behind the scenes. I mean, we editors think that we're behind the scenes. The people, the art department, the work that they do quickly and that carries it out, it's really an amazing thing. The scene where where Sawyer tells Horace that he's a dad, and Horace says, is 3 years really long enough to get over somebody? And then
such a good scene.
Sawyer, thank you. It is a really good scene. Again, Mr. Josh Holloway, ladies and gentlemen, he had the dialogue, and he told it he said it heartbreakingly beautiful. And I didn't want to just have the camera sitting there because it was a long scene, and I knew, I needed it to have a little bit of movement, just subtle, and you won't even notice it. But if it just sat still, I was afraid it would feel a little stagey and stale. And because of the camera was on a dolly that was right in front of a wall, and I can't remember exactly what the issue was, but they couldn't really manipulate the dolly with back, to the left and right in the way that I wanted it to, because we were like in a corner, and we were like, I was like, I don't know, do we do a slow zoom? That seems kind of cheesy. And finally, the dolly grip, God bless him, went, I know it needs to be done. And he pounds the wall behind him, and he goes, let's get this wall out of here. Huh. And I'm like, what? And people start scurrying. And before I know it, we got people literally knocking this wall out. And my thought was, well, I don't know if we have to knock a wall down for my benefit. But of course, this was nothing to them because it wasn't a full load-bearing wall. I mean, it was a movie set, and it was not hard for them to get it out of the way, and it was not hard for them to put it back. But it was just an amazing piece of movie magic in front of me. What is done to get these shows made is really, it's amazing.
That's super cool. Before we wrap, are there any other just anecdotes or moments from the filming of that episode or being on set that come to mind that are worth sharing that we haven't gotten into already?
I remember Josh Holloway. It was when we were at the carport, and they were set. The departments were setting up the lighting and the cameras and stuff, and I and Josh and a couple of the crew members were just sort of hanging out, and Josh suddenly goes, "Hey, come here," and he pulls us all in close. I'm going to be a dad, and we were all like, "Oh my God!" And this is when he, I think he was married. They had the first kid, and it was just
sweet.
So it was really a lucky moment to be there, to get to celebrate with this guy who I'd been working with, who I'd been editing and just admiring for all these years. It was a really sweet and real moment that had nothing to do with the show.
This is just a very random little tidbit that I should have asked you earlier rather than waiting for the end. Paul's necklace, the ankh, that hieroglyphic type thing that Amy pulls off of his neck and then holds on to, and Horace finds it. This at the beginning of this episode, you show from a distance in that first scene before the Dharma breaks in the statue of Taweret, the Egyptian goddess, and I think that statue I don't think we see it in that moment, but we see later in the year that at the statue they're holding two of those, one ankh in each hand.
I think that's right. I mean, I haven't seen those since they aired, but that is the statue, and indeed the foot that remains is that statue.
That's right. And I just was curious if there was something intentional about having that necklace in this episode when you first show the statue, even though I think you don't see that part of the statue.
I honestly can't remember at this point.
I wonder if that was in the script or what, or if somebody told you.
That was it was scripted.
Okay.
And
Interesting.
And I had forgotten that little note, and when I saw it this time, I thought to myself, now what? Why does he have that? And I just can't remember. I have to go back and watch the series from the beginning, which, by the way, I've been thinking about doing. I don't know about anybody else, but when I do watch one of these episodes, I just get caught up so easily. They're really episodes that I had nothing to do with are included here. It's really a well-made show, and it's just so engaging. I'm really so proud to have just gotten to play a small part in my own little role.
I mean, the fact that you have so many people this many years later that still want to have a conversation about it, it's crazy.
It's crazy. It really is. And I remember before it premiered, and I had seen the pilot. It was directed by J.J. Abrams, who of course never went on to do anything else.
Yes.
And I went, okay, this guy's brilliant. And I knew it was a good show, and I wondered, okay, are we going to be a commercial hit? And the critics are going to be like, or are we going to be like, are the critics going to rave about us, and the general population will be like, will neither like us? It would be nice to have it be both a popular hit and a critical hit, but that's unlikely. And when it happened, when the reviews came out loving it, and the day after, it was the highest rated premiere on ABC in 10 years. It was just, there was a sense of, is this really happening? This show is a unicorn, I mean, to get to be a part of it is a lot of luck involved, and a lot of pride. But again, Mr. Carlton, Mr. Damon, they made 6 compelling seasons. Maybe not every moment was compelling, but certainly most of them were.
Most of them. Yeah.
So I've been thinking about going back and just to enjoy rewatching it again.
Well, if you decide to rewatch, I have a halfway decent podcast to recommend for you.
As long as the hosts are interesting.
Yeah. This was super fun for me, so I appreciate
This
it.
is fun for me. I mean, it's fun to revisit after all this time, and it's fun to be able to talk about the experiences.
The most interesting thing to me about this is I guess I didn't realize, not knowing really much until we did this podcast about how television is produced, that editors had the power to sort of rearrange things and suggest that the story might work better or be more impactful if the audience learned this and then this and then this. That never occurred to me, and that's really neat to think about the idea that there's this much larger group of people deciding the cadence of these stories, and the things that to us are really fun to watch is like big reveals or, the tension building or the heat building up to a big point. That's something that a lot of people behind the scenes create for us.
Yeah, and I mean, it definitely sounds like the editors are making those decisions, in conjunction with the showrunners, with Damon and Carlton. But agreed. I mean, especially as someone who writes for a living, I always think, oh, there's a script and they film the script. But it's like, oh yeah, this is a good reminder of just the number of people who are involved in bringing that to life and deciding, what we actually see on screen. Mm-hmm. That it's not just, the written word translated to film.
Yeah.
I also loved his story about the taking the wall out to help him film that Sawyer and Horace scene better. And what I liked about it is just he called it movie magic, but it reminded me of something he said last week, which was it's a miracle that any episode of television ever gets made, which is a comment that I liked a lot. And to go back to what you're saying, this gives me a whole lot, even more respect for the art of doing this stuff. Mm-hmm. Anyway, we will be back next week with Season 5, Episode 10, He's Are You, which is a Saeed episode.
And we will have the promised conversation with Eric Lang, who played Radzinsky.
Yeah, again, nice guy in person, but fun to talk about what a jerk he is on the screen.
As Sammy mentioned earlier, if you want to call us and leave us a hot take, we are at 9546-DHARMA. You can also record a voice memo on your phone and message that to us at facebook.com/thehatchpodcast. And we're on Twitter at The Hatch Podcast.
In the meantime, we'd also love it if you could rate and review the show. We ask this every week, but we always enjoy it immensely when people do it, Apple or Spotify or wherever you listen.
Our theme music is by Andy G. Cohen, and our cover art is by Danny Roth.
And we will be back next week.
Namaste.